Hey guys, this is the first episode. The first episode of this Saints Row Origins. And well, what I propose is that that in the beginning, like, this would be like a prequel lore explanation of what happened before the events of Saints Row 1 and during the events of Saints Row 1 and after the events of Saints Row 1. Let's say that before Playa, the protagonist of Saints Row 1, ever joined the Saints. Let's say Alejandro Lopez and his wife moved to Stillwater years ago, and during that time, in the first Saints Row, or the prequel to the first Saints Row, the first Saints Row would have a prequel. And this prequel happens to have, like, Alejandro Lopez and his wife, his 3 children, and his adoptive son, all higher ups of the Saints Row Saints Row 1 prequel. And in the first Saints Row game, in the prequel, there would have been Alejandro Lopez and his wife. Let's just call her let's call her Lana Lopez. Yeah, let's call her Lana Lopez. And Lana Lopez had half of the downtown Vice King territory and all of the suburbs territory that would have gone to both the Vice Kings and the West Side Rollers. And she ran half of the downtown Vice Kings territory and all of the North Island of Stillwater, and running that upper half of the upper left-hand half of the upper North Island of Stillwater before the West Side Rollers and the Vice Kings took over that. And during that war, the Vice Kings took over that means of territory. And then as insult to injury, Lana Lopez loses her life against that of the West Side Rulers. And during that time, Victor Rodriguez loses his own flesh and blood sister, Sabrina Rodriguez, to the Vice Kings in the Projects District during the war between the Los Carnales and the Vice Kings. And once the Projects and the Red Light District was cleared out of Vice Kings, then Victor Rodriguez would have saw justified to constantly go into the home turf of the Vice Kings and stir up so much shit against the Vice Kings to survive a dozen VK drive-bys. And with that being said, the Vice Kings have killed Victor Rodriguez's sister. During that scuffle, Sabrina Rodriguez would be openly gunned down, walking alongside her brother Victor Rodriguez. And Victor Rodriguez survives a dozen VK drive-bys. Estimating how many drive-by shootings he survived would be about 10 to 16 drive-bys that he survived. And the Vice Kings could not manage to keep him down. And the Vice Kings and the Los Carnales started going to war. And then, as an act of disrespect towards the Vice Kings' arch nemesis, the Los Carnales, they wound up going and killing Alejandro Lopez. And with Alejandro Lopez going and dying by the hands of the Vice Kings stopped being about protecting Sunnyvale and to have started going and running around, taking over the entire downtown area, and taking over every neighborhood and cornering Alejandro Lopez. And what I propose is that Alejandro Lopez ends up going about heading to the afterlife after he's gotten shot and got endless barrages of drive-by shootings done to him. And with that, the Vice King started to surge in power. And during that time, let's say Sophia Lopez ends up dropping her flags because she was once a Vice King hater herself, and then decided to go about having to move in her early 20s to go and move to New York City, where she met Emmanuel Vinet and started to have kids. But with that being said, we have like Emmanuel Vinet, because during the time that Emmanuel Vinet had a son, Julio Vinet is the older brother of Mila Vinet. And how does this make sense? Well, you see, Mila Vinet from Dead or Alive is related to the Lopez brothers from Saints Row, because she's basically their niece, their direct biological niece. And Julio Lopez moved in his mid to late 20s to join in the Los Carnales, because Julio Lopez, well, not Julio Lopez, but Julio Vinet wound up taking over the Saints Row district. And then the Vice Kings took over Mission Beach, and with the last remainder of Julio Vinet's own set got wiped out. Finally got wiped out by the Saints after a prolonged warfare, because Julio Vinet went to prison and is rotting the rest of his life in prison. But some of the Los Carnales got arrested by the police, which started up the prison branch of the Los Carnales gang. And during the absence of real leadership, Julio Vinet took over the Los Carnales after his biological uncles were killed, and his honorary adoptive uncle was killed, but his mother, who dropped her flags to move to New York City because she was the only immediate Lopez family member that was related and the little sister of Hector and Angelo, because how Julio Vinet got arrested is that the Vice Kings, they tore up his set. He had three main factions of his set of the Saints Row district card. The Saints Row card of the Los Carnales was torn up. Whereas as the long since arrested special female lieutenant of the West Side Rollers, was arrested. And we all know that Angela was killed on the northeast or northwest of the very neighborhood of Mission Beach. She was killed during a gang war. And that's what brought the Vice Kings to taking over Mission Beach. But the Vice Kings, they were forced out of the Mission Beach neighborhood. And what I propose is that the Vice Kings started being about the whole entirety of the Vice Kings started getting pushed out of Mission Beach by the Saints. Because Playa killed off a handful of Saints from the Mission Beach neighborhood. Because LeVar, which was a Vice King low-level lieutenant, stated about his position in the Vice Kings. He was gunned down. His crew wound up running all over Harrow Gates during a three-way, maybe four-way gang war, a four-way crossfire fight with the Vice Kings, the Los Carnales, the West Side Rulers, the Saints. But yet 2 out of Julius's Saints wound up getting a tip from Troy about a gang war with 3 crews going into a gang warfare. And with that being said, we all know that Sofia Lopez wound up going and ending up just constantly just wound up like tried and true quit the Los Carnales because Sofia Lopez wanted a better life for herself and for her son and her daughter. So she moved to New York City in her mid-20s. So she decided to meet Emmanuel Vinet. And during that time, during Mila Vinet's childhood, she got less and less holiday gifts from her own family due to Playa murdering her uncles. So what proposed is that Mila Vinet was unaware. And what had happened is that during the prequel, Mila ends up being born during the rise of the West Side Rollers.
You missed.
But her older brother was born during the rise of the Vice Kings. But during the rise of the Third Street Saints, Julio Vinette and Mila Vinette are in their adult years, finishing their high school years in a New York high school. And somehow, during that time, the Vice Kings started to fall. And during that, the Vice Kings fell, the West Side Rollers fell, and upon the graduation of Mila and Julio, they wound up graduating high school, and during their young adult years, during the fall of the Third Street Saints, and during the collapse of the Third Street Saints, Mila and her brother became adults, young adults. And with every ounce of said time that Julio Vinette spent in prison, and during that, and in between the events, Julio Lopez, well, not Julio Lopez, but Julio Vinette was executed during the 5 years where Playa spent 5 years, and Julio Vinette was executed in prison by electric chair. And Mila Vinette became the only living child and the only surviving child of Sophia Lopez. And during that, Sophia Lopez passes away upon Mila Vinette's 24th birthday. And during the events of Saints Row 2, but we'll get into that a little later on. But we'll get into that, but I'd like to change it up from the Los Carnales origins to shifting it to a new origins